Chapter 1. The last days of Pompeii remain one of history's most haunting images. A thriving Roman city, nestled in the shadow of a volcano, struck without warning. It was buried in ash and preserved so perfectly that, nearly 2,000 years later, we can still walk its streets. The image is so vivid and so overwhelming that it has become the only thing we remember. But it shouldn't be. No place can be truly understood through its worst moment alone. Tonight, we're going to trace Pompeii through its entire existence, from its first settlements, through conquests and transformations, through times of war and prosperity, to the very forces that shaped the city it became. We'll experience the eruption not as the city's death, but as a pivotal turning point in its long life. We'll see how that life persisted in unexpected ways, with the city refusing to disappear and continuing to draw people back. We'll explore how it faded into legend, only to be rediscovered centuries later, reigniting both greed and curiosity, and sparking an ongoing struggle to understand and preserve what remains. But before we begin, I want to thank all of you who have been listening, sharing your thoughts, and patiently waiting for the next story. It's been quite a journey putting this together, and I truly hope you'll feel it was worth the wait. Before there was a city, there was a mountain, and it loomed. Chapter 2. Over a coastal plain in sunny southern Italy, the land had bled fire for millennia, blanketing the region of Campania in layers of ash, turning the earth dark and fertile beyond measure. But now it stood silent. Its fires had gone quiet, its slopes turned green with forests, and at its base, cutting through all that richness, the Sarno River flowed steadily. Into this landscape, in the 8th century BC, came the Oscans, an Italic tribe of farmers and herders who made their way down from the surrounding highlands. They settled on a low plateau, a spur of ancient lava that had cooled and hardened into a natural rise overlooking the river as it wound its way to the sea. The mountain gave them everything. Its forests offered timber for their homes, and the hardened earth beneath their feet bore the weight of walls and hearths. But it was the soil that made this land truly precious. The volcanic earth produced harvests unlike anywhere else. The olive trees grew strong and heavy with fruit, yielding oil in abundance. The grapevines flourished, producing a dark, potent wine. They built their homes in 5 small villages, simple huts of wood and stone clustered together on the plain. In Oscan, the word for 5 was Pampa, and so the place became known as Pompeii, a name that at its core simply meant the 5. Chapter 3. For generations, the world of the Oscans was bounded by the mountain and the bay. Their lives centered on the soil and what the land could provide. But the sea was a highway, and it was about to bring a new world to their doorstep. Around the year 740 BC, a profound and lasting change arrived in Campania. Across the bay, a new power took root with the founding of Cumae, the first Greek city on the Italian mainland. These newcomers were a different breed of men. They were not farmers from the hills. They were mariners and merchants, adventurers from a more ancient and sophisticated civilization. They saw the world not as a collection of fields, but as a network of ports. For them, the mouth of the Sarno River was a perfect gateway, a calm, safe harbor that led directly into the fertile heartland of Campania. The Greeks came seeking the raw bounty of the land. The timber from the mountains' forests needed for their ships, and the surplus grain from the fields. In return, they offered the products of a more refined world. For the first time, the people of Pompeii saw fine pottery painted with intricate scenes of gods and heroes, a window into a universe of myth they had never known. They handled elegant bronze vessels, and they tasted the smoother, more delicate flavors of Greek wine and olive oil. But the trade brought more than goods. It carried ideas, a completely different way of thinking. Oscan craftsmen, who for generations had shaped simple, functional pots, now studied the elegant forms and painted motifs of the Greeks, blending foreign aesthetics with their own traditions. Leaders who had once ruled purely by strength and custom began to witness another kind of power, one rooted in wealth and commerce. It was the beginning of a cultural fusion, a slow and irreversible blending of two worlds. The most powerful symbol of this new influence appeared in the 6th century BC. On a prominent bluff of land overlooking the bay, a great temple was built. It was not a simple open-air shrine to local spirits, but a grand Doric temple constructed in the pure Greek style. The temple stood as a bold statement. This humble Oscan town now saw itself as part of a wider Mediterranean world, a crucial meeting point between the earthbound Italic interior and the dynamic seafaring civilization of the Greeks, as the Greek presence solidified along the coast. Chapter 4. The Etruscan Shadow. A new power was pressing down from the north, a mighty and enigmatic civilization known as the Etruscans. Master engineers, sophisticated artists, and disciplined warriors, they were poised to dominate the Italian peninsula. Drawn by the legendary fertility of Campania, they expanded south and established a stronghold at Capua. From there, their influence rippled outward, and the small port of Pompeii was inevitably pulled into their orbit. It was not a violent conquest, but a political and economic alignment. The Etruscans were masterful organizers, and under their sway, the agricultural potential of the region was maximized. Trade along the Sarno River grew regular and profitable. The town's prosperity swelled, and with it, its strategic importance. To protect this growing wealth, Pompeii began constructing its first true city walls, a formidable barrier built from blocks of tufa, a soft but durable volcanic stone. They were designed with remarkable foresight. The enclosure covered not only the town's core of homes and workshops, but also a broad swath of surrounding farmland, ensuring that in the event of a siege, the inhabitants would have a secure supply of food within their defenses. Capua's dominance brought a new uniformity to the region. Yet, Etruscan ambition was not content with rich inland plains. They sought control of the entire bay. This goal brought them into direct conflict with the Greeks. Their expansion was first checked in 524 BC, when a major assault on the Greek city of Cumae was repelled. For half a century, a tense balance of power held, until 474 BC, when the Etruscans struck again. Their fleet launched against Cumae and met with disaster. The great naval battle ended in a crushing defeat, and with their sea power broken, their hold on Campania collapsed. The Etruscan presence faded from Pompeii, leaving behind only the traces of their order in the city's walls and homes. With their departure, a heavy stillness settled on the town. The stable economic system that had connected it to the wider world shattered. Trading ships became a rare sight, and inland roads fell silent as merchants, wary of the unstable countryside, chose safer routes. Pompeii was becoming a place of stagnation, a provincial town overshadowed by its neighbors. But this decline would not last. Chapter 5. The Samnite Conquest. From the mountains of Italy's interior, a new and vigorous power was rising. The Samnites, a fiercely independent, warlike people who shared a common Oscan ancestry with the earliest founders of Pompeii. When they took control, it was not merely a conquest, it was a rebirth. Under Samnite rule, the original Oscan language was restored to prominence in government, religion, and public life. After centuries of Greek and Etruscan influence, the city's original voice returned. Stability and order followed. Trade revived, and Pompeii began to prosper once more. A people forged in the hard realities of mountain warfare understood that wealth invited danger. The old tufa walls were no longer deemed sufficient, so the Samnites embarked on a project of immense scale. They raised two parallel walls of hard Sarno limestone, filling the space between with a massive core of earth and rubble. The result was not merely a barrier, but an imposing, impenetrable ring of stone that secured the peace. Behind these new defenses, Pompeii's wealth and confidence soared. The Samnite elite, enriched by the abundance of the land, began to build houses on a scale never seen before. Public life became more refined. The Forum, once a simple marketplace, was reshaped into an organized, monumental center of civic life. While the city's principal temples were maintained and richly embellished, Pompeii now stood as a powerful, prosperous Samnite city, a thriving regional hub. Its identity was a rich and complex tapestry. Its heart was fiercely Oscan. Its culture was colored by the legacies of the Greeks and Etruscans, and its body was clad in the stone armor of its new rulers. It was a city at the height of its power, confident and secure, convinced that its destiny lay in its own hands. But as the 4th century BC drew to a close, a new power began to rise. Chapter 6. Rome's Reluctant Ally. Rome had begun to assert itself on the Italian peninsula. It was not merely a loose confederation of tribes or a chain of independent coastal cities, but a single, ambitious city-state, a people of soldiers, engineers, and lawmakers from the river plains of central Italy. Its expansion would be unlike anything that had come before, relentless, all-consuming, and systematic. For the Samnites who now ruled Pompeii, Rome's rise represented a direct, existential threat. What followed was a long and brutal struggle, the Samnite Wars. For more than half a century, the hills and valleys of central and southern Italy became a bloody battleground. As a strong and loyal Samnite city, Pompeii was inevitably drawn into the fight for survival. Men marched from its gates to join the armies. Farms were requisitioned for the war effort, and the people anxiously awaited news from the front. Year by year, the news grew worse. The Roman legions, disciplined and relentless, proved an unstoppable force. Around 310 BC, a Roman fleet landed on the coast, sending raiding parties into the surrounding lands, a brutal demonstration of how far their reach had extended. Though local forces managed to drive the invaders back, the message was unmistakable. The war was no longer distant. By 290 BC, the long struggle had reached its bitter end. Pompeii faced a stark choice: annihilation or submission. Reluctantly, they chose to yield. Pompeii was not destroyed or plundered. Instead, it was bound to Rome by treaty, becoming a socius, an ally in name, but a subordinate in power. The arrangement was a gilded cage. Pompeii lost the right to conduct its own foreign affairs, and its people were now obligated to provide soldiers for Rome's endless wars. In return, they retained a measure of autonomy, allowing life within the walls to continue much as it always had. For 2 centuries, Pompeii lived in a state of uneasy peace. Protected by Roman power, the city prospered, trade revived, and its elite adorned the streets with new monuments, the first public baths, elegant temples, and a grand theater. Yet, beneath this surface of success, resentment simmered. Generation after generation, Pompeian men were sent to fight and die for Rome, allies without equality, their loyalty and blood taken for granted. The peace held, but it rested on an imbalance that could not last forever. Chapter 7. The Social War and Sulla's Siege. In 91 BC, the Roman Senate once again refused to grant its allies the citizenship they had earned with their blood. The dam of resentment finally broke. Across the peninsula, the allies rose in a violent, desperate rebellion known as the Social War, a conflict that would tear the region apart. Alongside its neighbors in Campania, Pompeii joined the uprising, declaring its freedom from Roman rule. Within the city, the Latin language was set aside. Oscan, the tongue of their ancestors, was restored as the language of law and public life, a clear, deliberate claim to sovereignty. The Roman response was swift and merciless. This was not a foreign war. It was a rebellion at the very heart of their power, and it had to be crushed without pity. The Republic dispatched one of its most ruthless generals, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, to pacify the rebels in Campania. In the year 89 BC, his legions arrived at the gates of Pompeii. In defiance, the men of the city took up their positions on the great limestone ramparts, ready to defend their home against the very power that had once guaranteed its peace. The assault fell on the northern wall, the city's strongest section, but also its most vulnerable, as it faced the open plain where Sulla could mass his infantry. For weeks, Roman siege engines hurled stones against the walls. The defenders held firm, bearing the assault with little real damage. But Pompeii's fate no longer rested on its walls. It was bound to the wider rebellion, which was collapsing across Campania. As the other allied cities fell to the disciplined power of the Roman legions, Pompeii stood alone. With no relief coming and no allies left to fight beside them, the defenders laid down their arms. The gates were opened. Pompeii did not fight to its own destruction. Once again, it chose survival. Sulla's legions marched through the gates, and the city that had resisted for so long fell quiet. Its future now lay entirely in the hands of the man who had brought it to its knees. Chapter 8. The New Order. For 9 years, Pompeii lingered in a state of uncertainty. Its building projects ceased, and its commerce dwindled. The city was holding its breath, its fate suspended on the fortunes of a distant general. When Lucius Cornelius Sulla finally returned to Italy, he did not come as a mere conqueror, but as an absolute dictator, the undisputed master of the Roman world. In 80 BC, his attention turned to the rebel city that had once defied him. His judgment was not destruction, but erasure. He decreed that Pompeii be refounded as a Roman colony, granting it an imposing new title, Colonia Cornelia Veneria Pompeianorum. This was a declaration of ownership. Cornelia honored Sulla's own powerful clan, a reminder of whose iron hand now held the city. Veneria was a dedication to Venus, Sulla's divine patron and the proclaimed source of his victories. Pompeii now belonged to the Cornelii and to Venus. Its old gods and old masters were silenced. This silencing was methodical. Latin became the language of law, commerce, and public life. Oscan, once reasserted with such pride during the rebellion, was driven from the forum, retreating into the quiet corners of the home, the language of private memory. The most devastating blow, however, was the confiscation of property. The great Samnite families who had led the rebellion were stripped of everything. Their ancestral homes and fertile vineyards were handed to 2,000 of Sulla's battle-hardened veterans. These men, who had followed Sulla across the world, became the new ruling class, a Roman elite planted directly on top of the defeated population. Chapter 9. Building a Roman City. For the conquest to be permanent, the city's public face had to change. The new rulers undertook a monumental task, reshaping Pompeii in stone, ensuring its architecture spoke the language of Rome. Over the following decades, Pompeii became a vast construction site. The transformation began in the Forum. For centuries, this had been a chaotic, open marketplace. Now, it was remade as a showcase of Roman order. On its western flank rose a new basilica, the seat of law and commerce. Beside it, the main temple was rebuilt as a Capitolium, dedicated to the official gods of the Roman state, Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. Alongside these monuments of authority, the Forum's new design included the Forum Baths, a revolutionary space for communal well-being. This was not just for hygiene, but a reflection of the Roman way of life, where physical care and social interaction merged. To forge a lasting community, the leaders knew they needed to provide spectacle. A great amphitheater was built on the city's edge, one of the first of its kind in the Roman world, designed for the brutal pageantry of gladiatorial combat. Yet, a quieter construction revealed another side of Roman life. The Odeon, a smaller, roofed playhouse for the refined pleasures of music and poetry. Pompeii was to be a city of both the sword and the lyre, of both brutal power and sophisticated art. Chapter 10. The Augustan Golden Age. The Roman world, however, soon descended into chaos. For decades, the peninsula was scarred by civil war, and for Pompeii, this meant fear and shifting loyalties. The turmoil finally ended in 31 BC when Octavian emerged victorious, taking the name Augustus and bringing peace to the Roman world. For Pompeii, the arrival of this Pax Romana felt like the dawn after a long, violent night. Confidence returned, and with it, a wave of prosperity. Pompeii's reputation grew not just as a center for trade, but as a fashionable resort town for the Roman elite. Wealthy senators and merchants built luxurious seaside villas, drawn by the region's beauty and its sophisticated Greek heritage. This ambition found its ultimate expression in an engineering feat remarkable even by Roman standards, the Aqua Augusta. Completed around 20 BC, this aqueduct was part of a 100-mile-long regional network, channeling a constant, reliable supply of clean mountain water directly into the heart of the city. It gushed from public fountains, improving the health of every citizen, while the wealthiest residents enjoyed the ultimate luxury, private plumbing in their own homes. Simultaneously, the city's streets were modernized. Workers systematically paved the old gravel roads with heavy, hard-wearing basalt blocks. They raised high sidewalks to protect pedestrians from cart traffic and installed large stepping stones at intersections, allowing citizens to cross the streets above the flow of rainwater and refuse. The era also brought changes to spiritual life. To unify his vast empire, Augustus introduced a new object of devotion, the emperor himself. A temple rose in the forum dedicated to the divine spirit of the living emperor, and the practice filtered down into the heart of the home, where families added the guardian spirits of Augustus to their household shrines. The Augustan peace had transformed the vast Roman world into a new, cohesive reality. Chapter 11. The Engine of Prosperity. A unified and reliable market had emerged, and with it, a surge in production that elevated Pompeii from a regional center to a thriving hub of trade and craftsmanship. The city's new ambition was no longer merely to live well, it was to supply an empire. The old patchwork of family farms was steadily absorbed into large-scale estates, where agriculture was treated as a major enterprise. Hillsides were terraced with high-yield vines and olive trees, the region's most profitable crops. At harvest, the resulting wine and oil were sealed in iconic, two-handled amphorae, stamped with an estate's mark, a guarantee of quality that carried the fame of Vesuvius across the Mediterranean. While ships laden with wine and oil departed, others arrived with the spoils of Roman luxury. Marble from distant quarries, crates of raw metals, fragrant spices from the east, and even wild animals destined for the amphitheater. But Pompeii was more than a port. It was a city of artisans. Textile makers transformed local wool into fine cloth. Perfume workshops blended exotic spices with native flowers, and metalworkers crafted bronze lamps in busy shops. Meanwhile, the city became the capital of an immensely profitable industry, garum. In workshops lining the port, fish and salt were baked under the sun to create the empire's most sought-after condiment, a savory sauce ranging from cheap army rations to amber nectar prized by the Roman elite. Yet, a brutal foundation supported this engine of prosperity, the forced labor of thousands of enslaved men, women, and children. The golden age of Pompeii, like that of Rome itself, rested on a system of profound human exploitation. Within this system, however, existed the possibility of manumission. While freedom was a difficult path, it acted as a persistent driving force for ambition. Once freed, these individuals often possessed the sharpest commercial minds in the city, becoming managers, ship owners, and brokers, the very people who fueled the city's restless, relentless energy. Chapter 12. Gladiators and Riot. By 59 AD, the city had grown rich, confident, and perhaps a little arrogant. Its people no longer saw themselves as subjects of a colony, but as citizens of a commercial powerhouse. Like any city eager to assert itself, Pompeii needed a rival, and it found one in nearby Nuceria. This simmering animosity reached a breaking point during a magnificent set of gladiatorial games. The amphitheater was packed, but the crowd was dangerously divided. Thousands of Pompeians and Nucerians sat side by side, and it took only a few shouted insults to ignite the tension. A hurled stone shattered the fragile peace. Suddenly, the spectacle in the arena was forgotten, replaced by a chaotic battle in the stands. The violence spilled out into the streets, becoming a full-scale riot. By the time the fighting subsided, the ground was littered with the wounded and the dead. The people of Nuceria, viewing this as a massacre, appealed directly to Emperor Nero. The Senate's verdict was a deep and calculated humiliation. Pompeii was banned from holding any gladiatorial games for 10 years. The amphitheater stood silent, its arches empty. For the people, this was more than a loss of entertainment. It was the loss of their city's defining ritual. They went on, quieter now, waiting for the day when the roar would return to those silent stone arches. Chapter 13. The Great Quake. On the 5th of February, 62 AD, a roar returned to Pompeii, but it did not come from the amphitheater. It came from below. The people were accustomed to minor tremors, but this was different. The ground began to move with a sustained, building force that seemed to have no end. Panic erupted as falling debris rained down from the buildings, and the earth itself remained unsteady. Then, the city began to break. Entire sections of the Forum collapsed, the basilica's columns tumbled, and temples were reduced to ruins. The Aqua Augusta was severed, and the city's lifeblood, its water, stopped flowing. For days, aftershocks sent fresh waves of terror through the survivors, who huddled in open spaces as they watched their world crumble. When the shaking finally stopped, a ghostly silence settled over Pompeii. Grand buildings stood as shattered skeletons, and rubble choked the streets. People wandered through the ruins of their former lives, struggling to make sense of the catastrophe. They did not see this as a geological event. To them, it was an act of the gods, a terrifying sign that the peace with the heavens had been broken. Chapter 14. The New Masters. The terror of the earthquake was soon overshadowed by the monumental task of rebuilding. For the traditional elite, the old landowning families who had defined Pompeii's values for generations, the disaster was a burden they were free to decline. Possessing villas across Italy, they viewed the ruined city as a liability and began to leave. Their departure created a power vacuum, quickly filled by the city's commercial class, the wealthy freedmen. Where the aristocracy saw only ruin, these men saw an unprecedented opportunity. They began buying up shattered villas for a fraction of their value, realizing that prestige, once inherited, could now be purchased from the rubble. As they took control, the social fabric of Pompeii shifted. Aristocratic homes were repurposed, private gardens became bakeries or fooleries, and grand halls were divided into rental units. Yet, Roman law imposed a firm boundary. No freedman, regardless of his fortune, could hold public office. Denied a political legacy of their own, these new elites channeled their ambitions into their children. They funded the reconstruction of civic monuments, not in their own names, but in those of their sons. In doing so, they were not merely rebuilding walls. They were renegotiating the city's social contract, cementing their family's place in the future of Pompeii. Chapter 15. The Scarred and Vibrant City. 17 years after the Great Quake, Pompeii was a city of three distinct recoveries. The new elite's wealth was unmistakable along the main streets, where workshops gleamed with fresh paint and villas were adorned with fashionable frescoes. Deeper within residential blocks, ordinary families rebuilt their lives with pragmatic resolve, restoring their homes room by room with salvaged timber. But there were also places left behind. Forgotten corners where hollow shells of homes stood as monuments to neglect. The social wounds of the past had healed. The amphitheater was once again alive with the roar of the crowd, its years of shame forgotten. On the city's walls, a vibrant dialogue unfolded. Political slogans vied for space with personal declarations of love, crude jokes, and raw customer feedback. It was a literate, passionate community where every citizen felt they had a voice. Yet, this world unfolded in the shadow of a restless mountain. Frequent tremors were now a part of daily life. Wells ran dry and springs ceased to flow, signs that the landscape was changing. But no one in Pompeii understood these warnings. To them, Vesuvius was simply a peaceful, vine-covered peak, a feature of the landscape, not a threat. Its last fire had long since passed into the realm of geological time. Chapter 16. The Day the Sky Fell. In 79 AD, the mountain awoke. Pliny the Elder, commander of the Roman fleet at Misenum, observed a cloud of a size and shape never seen before, a massive canopy that stretched into the sky like a Mediterranean umbrella pine. His scientific curiosity was sparked, but a frantic message from a friend trapped on the coast transformed his inquiry into a desperate naval rescue mission. As the fleet approached the coast, the mission became an ordeal. The sea was choked with floating volcanic debris, and a rain of gray ash and pumice turned the day into a suffocating darkness. In Pompeii, the debris accumulated with terrifying density, sealing doors and crushing roofs under the weight of the pumice. On the other side of the mountain, a swifter terror unfolded. The eruption column collapsed, sending surges of superheated gas and ash roaring down the slopes. Herculaneum was annihilated in an instant. By the morning of the second day, a third and fourth surge raced toward Pompeii, scorching the city in a wave of heat that killed all who remained within seconds. At Stabii, Pliny the Elder, burdened by a lifelong weakness of the lungs, collapsed on the shore and died. Across the bay at Misenum, his nephew, Pliny the Younger, fled with his mother as a vast black cloud swallowed the horizon. When the darkness finally lifted, The people of Misenum walked back to reclaim their lives. But across the bay, no such return was possible. In a single day, Pompeii had passed from a bustling city to a tomb, its centuries of history buried beneath a barren wasteland of rock and ash. Chapter 17, Forgotten Ashes. Pompeii vanished from the face of the earth, but most of its people did not. The eruption, for all its violence, unfolded over many hours. As the steady fall of pumice became a trap for those who lingered, it gave others precious time to escape. A great wave of refugees spread into the surrounding countryside, creating a humanitarian crisis of staggering proportions. Emperor Titus himself traveled to Campania to organize relief, but his officials concluded that the city was buried too deeply to be reclaimed. Still, the city was not left to rest in silence. Salvage teams tunneled into the ruins, stripping marble, bronze, and the fortunes left behind in strongboxes to fund the resettlement of survivors. As years passed, the eruption faded into memory, but the historian Tacitus was determined to preserve it. He turned to his friend, Pliny the Younger, who composed the only surviving eyewitness account of the disaster. Meanwhile, a small community of squatters returned to live on the very ground that had become a tomb, clinging to the remnants of the city for centuries. Their thread of existence was finally snapped in 472 AD, when a new eruption sent a final wave of ash across the region, sealing Pompeii away for 1,000 years. Chapter 18, Unearthing the Dead City. Nature reclaimed the landscape, and for over a millennium, locals knew the site only as La Civita, a faint folk memory of a buried life. In the late 16th century, architect Domenico Fontana stumbled upon painted frescoes while redirecting the Sarno River, but the world failed to recognize what he had found. It took until 1738, under the patronage of King Charles of Bourbon, for formal excavations to begin, though they were little more than treasure hunts. Miners drove long tunnels through the volcanic rock, focused only on recovering statues for royal palaces. Everything changed with the arrival of Carl Jacob Weber in 1750. Away from the destructive tunnels of Herculaneum, Weber found a site that offered a different possibility. Buried under shallower layers, it was a city that could be carefully uncovered. Weber created the first detailed architectural plans, documenting not just the grand public buildings, but the humble shopfronts and common homes. His work marked the birth of a new discipline, a shift from plunder to preservation. In 1763, his workmen uncovered an inscription, Residential Publica Pompeionorum. The city had finally restored its own name. Soon, Pompeii became the heartbeat of the Grand Tour, sparking a neoclassical obsession that transformed art, architecture, and design from London to St. Petersburg. Chapter 19, Fiorelli's Revolution. For over a century, Pompeii remained a royal quarry. But by the mid-19th century, the unification of Italy brought a new commitment to the nation's cultural legacy. Giuseppe Fiorelli was appointed director, and he immediately transformed the site from a plunder ground into a historical archive. He reversed the old, destructive methods, mandating that excavations proceed layer by layer from the top down. Fiorelli also applied a new rigor to cataloging, dividing the city into a grid of regions and blocks, ensuring every artifact had a precise address. During this work, his team made an extraordinary discovery: hollow cavities in the hardened ash. Fiorelli realized these were the impressions left by decomposing bodies. By pouring liquid plaster into these voids, he created casts that captured the final, tragic moments of Pompeii's residents with haunting clarity. The revolution in archaeology had finally revealed the lives behind the ruins. Chapter 20, A Legacy Under Threat. The very act of excavation created a tragic paradox. For 2,000 years, Pompeii was preserved because it was buried. Once exposed, it faced a second, slower destruction. The Campanian sun faded the frescoes, rain weakened the mortar, and roots pried apart the walls. The 20th century brought further scars. Allied bombing during World War II destroyed museums and homes. In the post-war years, neglect led to what many called Pompeii's second death. We now know, through the evidence of autumn fruits and harvest jars, that the eruption likely happened in the fall, not in August as long believed. Pompeii is not a frozen relic. It is a living history, constantly refined by every new discovery. Today, it exists in a state of profound contrast, a city of the dead that has never been more alive in our understanding. Chapter 21. The Living City and the Looming Mountain. Pompeii's life was extinguished in a single, catastrophic moment, and yet, it remains intensely alive, drawing millions of visitors into its silent streets, making it one of the most visited archaeological sites in the world. It offers an experience no other place can, not just a glimpse of scattered monuments, but the chance to explore the complete fabric of an ancient city and feel the rhythms of daily life still etched in stone. In these streets, Pompeii's entire history can be read. The remnants of the first Greek temple recall the city's early engagement with the wider world. The massive Samnite walls still bear the scars of Sulla's siege, and the amphitheater seems to echo with the roar of a riot that shook the empire. But it is the plaster casts of the victims that make the past feel inescapably real, collapsing 2,000 years in an instant and confronting every visitor with the raw, human tragedy of that final day. The story, however, extends beyond Pompeii's walls. Nearby, Herculaneum offers a more intimate, vivid experience. Entombed in superheated mud flows rather than falling ash, its buildings remain standing to a greater height, making it feel less like a ruin and more like a town simply abandoned by time. To truly understand these cities, one must also visit the National Archaeological Museum of Naples, where the delicate wonders of daily life. The finest mosaics, bronze statues, and intricate frescoes now reside. Yet, the primary character in this story remains the mountain itself. Vesuvius still looms above the landscape, a giant in a state of temporary repose. Its slopes, once covered in the vineyards that made Pompeii rich, are now home to a sprawling metropolis. More than 3 million people live in its shadow, making this one of the most densely populated and dangerous volcanic regions on the planet. Scientists monitor the mountain constantly, knowing that Vesuvius is overdue for another eruption, an event that, despite modern evacuation plans, would be catastrophic. But life here continues, as vibrant and chaotic as it was 2,000 years ago. The people who live around the modern bay do so not because they have forgotten the past, but because this is their home, and roots often run deeper than fear. In the end, Pompeii is more than just a tragedy preserved in ash. It is a lasting testament to the stubborn human impulse to build, to thrive, and to live fully, even on ground they know can betray them.